Good morning and welcome to the SMEP information sharing webinar for C004, our open call to address plastics pollution. I'm encouraged by the number of registrations. We've got over 100 registrants for this webinar, which indicates to me firstly the scale of the global plastics pollution problem, but it's also a very encouraging indicator of the number of people that are out there with active solutions to the problem within the plastics value chain. So diverse number of registrations from diverse sectors and from geographies. Welcome to our information sharing session. We hope that it's informative and useful for you. A brief introduction. My name is Amanda Dinan. I am a technical project manager with South North. Together with colleagues from Pegasus and ICAD, South North are the project management agent for the SMEP program, Sustainable Manufacturing and Environmental Pollution. As it says in its name, the program is very much around addressing the pollution problems generated by the manufacturing sector. The focus regions are South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Our funding is from British Aid, FCDO, and technical assistance is provided by UNCTAD for the program. Program has in total 24 million pounds available, and that's ready to contract work in the research realm. But the research is very much around practical research, which is about getting solutions into market. So evidence, practical piloting. Research around policy measures as well, all of them geared towards addressing practical solutions for pollution mitigation. Brief note on the agenda. We'll endeavour to move fairly quickly through the content. I have Terry McCormack with me. Terry, if you could say hello.
Sorry, I'll just unmute. When I heard percolate, I was grabbing a coffee. Hello, everybody.
There's Terry's voice. Terry is our contracted specialist who's been working alongside us to develop the terms of reference for C004. Terry comes from a long background in the plastics industry. He's a chemist by background. He's worked in plastic packaging and in the petrochemical sector, and also as a sustainability manager for several decades, engaging very actively with the alliances and initiatives around collaborative initiatives such as Plastics Europe to address plastics pollution mitigation. So he'll be talking more about the scope. I'm then joined by my colleagues from the SMEP program who will talk about procurement. Melanie Stark will lead that discussion. She's supported by Lorraine. Hi, Melanie. She's supported by Lorraine DeMaro and Claire Ensley from the contracts team, and Elizabeth McCombie will be on standby to answer questions. The Q&A session will be moderated by Jeremy Richardson. He's with Pegasus and he's the program lead. So as I mentioned, the SMEP program is very much a program that's anchored in the manufacturing sector. And thus it is that our plastics pollution intervention is rooted in practical solutions within the SMEP, within the plastics value chain. And I'm sure the participants here are now well familiar with the terms of reference. It's very evident that our solutions are embedded within that process. The focus is on single-use plastics, obviously those plastics which are prevalent within the marine environment. But yeah, there's a wide variety, but typically single-use plastics or just used for a few times, such as agricultural mulch. PPE equipment is another of the problem plastics that we're anticipating that there will be solutions for in this call for concepts. Brief comment on the relationship of the program to the regional and local context. The application form for the context for your concept submissions, very much it asks for an interrogation of how the concept relates to the local, the regional context, and how well aligned it is to what's taking place within the focus countries. And then also a note about the relationship of SMEP to other programs. We seek very much to build alliances And those of you who've looked at the website will see that we are profiling alliances that are doing similar work that are potentially complementary to SMEP or reinforce the work that SMEP's doing. A note on geographical scope. So while we have the target focus countries, FCDO focus countries itemized, to note that we will review concepts that have application in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. Where they're not within the focus countries, a strong case needs to be made for the impact of these solutions, and also potentially their potential for the focus countries. So just to be clear that while they're focus countries, there's also an acceptance for wider solutions within the region. The procurement runs in a two-stage process. We've got an open call running for the call for concepts. It's an online registration process and a very clear online application form, which you will have sight of once you embark on that registration process. Indicate your interest in submitting a concept, and then immediately there is access to that application form. There's you'll see that there's space as well to submit a pitch, where there's latitude to illustrate your concept, to include visuals of the concept, and then also very defined set questions where we're seeking specific information from the applicants. We shortlist and select concepts which are deemed to have the most promise, and then we enter the restricted request for proposal stage. Just a revision of the budget, and I'm sure you're well familiar with our budget categories, starting at £250,000 and accepting concepts with funding requirements to as much as £1.5 million. So we've specified there's no specifics on the duration of the program, but execution between 30 to 36 months, tiered according to those bands. Our budget requirement for the call for concepts is fairly high level at this stage. We're simply asking for a high level budget indicating fees and indicating capital requirements, and also a breakdown of what that funding requirement would be for the first 2 quarters of the program implementation. To note with our timeframes, we have 6 weeks for the call for concepts submission. We're well into that. And we also have 6 weeks for the request for proposal submission. Important to note that the submission for due diligence will close off 2 weeks prior to the close off for the request for proposals. So, and that's partially the reason why we have Melanie here. She's going to be talking about the due diligence requirements so that you can prepare well ahead for the due diligence submission, and also so that that you can be well aware of the requirements and potentially reach out to partners that that would make a good collaboration point where you don't meet the FCDO due diligence requirements with the requisite track record or turnover record, risk management procedures, and so forth. But you'll hear more about that as we proceed. I'm going to ask Terry to begin with his input on the scope of the intervention at this point. Over to you, Terry.
Thanks, Amanda. Hello again, everybody. I want to spend a few minutes looking at the technical scope of the call. This is especially for those who are not familiar with this so far. There are essentially 3 categories of intervention that we foresee regarding plastics pollution mitigation. And basically, that is covering the scope of the solutions that we are looking for. So first of all, we have material development and material substitution. And you can read off here the areas that we foresee: replacing established plastics with alternatives, integrating well-designed biodegradable solutions, improving the recyclability of single-use items. We know, as Amanda touched on, that single-use items are a main concern. Then we have this area of accelerated biodegradation. Now, this is essentially an end-of-life solution, looking at how we might control the nature and the rate of degradation of plastics at the end of their normal service life. The third area is involving manufacturing. Now, manufacturing is a core area of SMEP in any case. And basically, here we're looking at preventing materials which we know can escape from plastics production and plastics conversion processes. We also want to look at the repurposing of plastic articles. So instead of just having one life cycle, they can have multiple uses. And finally, this area of industrial symbiosis, really this goes through all of the manufacturing aspects of this call. How do you turn a waste into a resource back into a product? And I hope you can see at the bottom, there are two notes that we want to make here. The solutions may be based on a combination of the above mentioned categories of intervention. And there's a note of caution, a health warning, if you will, on biodegradation, and that is not a panacea. And it needs to be used very cautiously. And we have to be certain that biodegradable solutions are not going to impede, existing waste management systems. Okay, I want to put this into context by looking at what I would call a simplified version of a life cycle, typical life cycle of a product. So if you look on the left-hand side, you have raw materials production, you have the supply to the converters. These are the people who are making your articles, your products, your items. These are subsequently distributed to the consumers, and then you have what we call the use phase. At the end of their normal life, you have what we call EOL, end of life. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the end-of-life management aspects. So this is broken down into municipal solid waste management. So that's the system for collecting, waste products from the community. You have disposal, and you have energy from waste. But you also have treatment. So you have material recycling, you have biomass treatment, and you have relatively newly what we would call chemical recycling. And now we need to look at which of these are within the scope of this particular call. So if we look at the next slide, please. Okay, what we tried to do here was block off those areas to show you where, what we're looking at here. On the far left, you will see the leakage convention that in manufacturing, you need to avoid product escape. And that happens in manufacturing and conversion, but also through distribution in particular. And looking across at material recycling, where you have biomass treatment and you're going back to a product or to a precursor for a product, that would be included. Chemical recycling, where you go back to products, would also be included. But if you're going to fuels, that's not included. And bioenergy is not included either. So we're not looking at these kind of recovery options. We're looking more at recycling options. And the other area that we have excluded, not that it's not important, but is remediation. So going out there and trying to collect all of the waste plastics that you might find in the riverine or ocean context, that is really covered off by other types of programs. So we've excluded that one from here. So if we look at the next slide, this is adding a little bit more detail. So we see in the top box on the left-hand side, traditional polymers can be within scope, but only if they are mindfully applied, as we've said. So we don't want more of the same, so more of the same issues, single-use materials, which are creating problems downstream. New polymers, biopolymers, and again with this health warning that please, if you're looking at biodegraded systems, that they are well thought through in terms of their subsequent impacts. Alternative materials, so taking plastics out of the loop where you have the opportunity with certain applications, and recycle materials. I'll put a few arrows on this particular diagram, and hopefully it's not too complicated, but basically material recycling you can see is going back into raw materials production or indeed into conversion. So that is something that is of interest. If you look at all of these steps I've mentioned, industrial symbiosis in a simpler definition of that. So byproducts from raw material production being used somewhere else, so not creating a waste. In conversion, what do you do with the wastage within conversion? Again, that is kind of byproducts which could be used elsewhere. And then focusing a little bit on consumption, we have the use I just mentioned, but you also have the opportunity for reuse. So refurbishment loops, repurposing of plastics at the end of their first service life. These are interesting to us. So new models of consuming and reconsuming are of interest. So these kind of opportunities for secondary uses. And above that, you see a box, design or concept change. This is really where we're trying to say that these should be approaches which underpin, the approaches that are being followed, the solutions that are being offered. So think differently about how you redesign single-use items, which are serving a societal need, but doing it in a better way. So the next slide, I think, just kind of puts an envelope around the scope. This is for the purposes of saying, well, okay, we want to concentrate and focus on these areas. A lot of them are upstream, but not exclusively. So trying to turn off the tap at source. But as you can see here, throughout the piece, we are interested in novel solutions and new ways of doing things. Okay, thank you. For the next slide, this concerns the actual submission itself, which is broken down into different areas, the online submission. And I'm going to talk to the technical side of things a little bit. First of all, clearly, if you're coming forward with a solution to mitigate plastics pollution, describe it. How does it fit within our program? And is consistent with the overall aims. What are the drivers and barriers to progress that you foresee with your particular solution? We don't expect anything to be perfect. The whole idea is to look at how things might be developed. So what does the probability of success require? How do you improve the probability of success? The technical status, so where are you at in the development? What do you see as being the next steps? And we try to use, the technology readiness approach here. If you see in the box below, I think Amanda mentioned that we're looking for, research. You've already gone through the research, and now we're looking at the development stage. So we're pretty much talking about applied research, more applied research and development and beyond here. So how do you go through a pilot scale operation? What would need to happen there? How do you subsequently scale that up? Then going to commissioning in a real, environment, active commissioning and full operations. These are the areas we're particularly interested in if it's possible. But of course, we're going to get all kinds of solutions at different stages of their development. And this is something you need to describe to us. And then another caveat here, intellectual property considerations. So have you protected the IP, NDAs, and so forth? Tell us a little bit about that also. Okay, again, following on from the aspects of the submission, having described technically what it's about and what it's aiming to do, what is the impact? What do you foresee as being its effect on plastics pollution in general? So which kind of applications are you referring to, and to which extent? Will it make a difference, or could it make a difference? And this is I described as being market coverage. There's also the geographical coverage, and as mentioned by Amanda, we are particularly interested in certain territories here, so target countries. It may be that a particular solution could have application in one place, but not in another. So tell us a little bit about its, let's say, its potential in terms of the geography. And then, importantly, what difference is this going to make in terms of the socio-economic type of impacts and environmental impact? So if you like, fulfilling the sustainability requirements, and we want to understand things like, would it create local wealth and employment? How does it improve the quality of life and the lot of the consumer, the communities and so forth? What kind of environmental improvement do you expect from this? Then what kind of resources, if it's a material, for example, which sort of resources does it need in order to be able to be commercialized going forward? What are the life cycle impacts? Have you considered? Ultimately, we don't want to replace one problem with another. So having an understanding of the life cycle impacts of these solutions is important also. And then, obviously, the last bullet there is very important in this section. The ethos of the FCDO is, equal opportunity and to provide those a better life for marginalized groups. So this kind of social impact is of prime importance to people who are funding this program and also ourselves. And then the last item here, excuse me, is on delivery. How do you see this project evolving? Can you map out for the next 3 years the sort of activities and the kind of budget level that would be needed in order to take this particular solution and project forward? And then the elements of the business model, not looking for a full business plan, certainly not at this submission, but what do you understand to be the main areas of the business model? How do you expect that to be further developed during the project? And that might be one of the prime objectives. And then the very last bullet is stakeholder involvement. Do you know who, the parties within the value chain that you need to be engaging with? Have you started that? Which assistance and help would you need in order to network further and so forth? So having an idea, and you can see that diagram there of, it's about suppliers, or it's about producers or distributors or retailers, waste management players, and so forth. Having an idea of the stakeholder mapping that would need to happen at some stage going forward. I think that's my final slide. So thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. As Amanda has already pointed out, the period for the due diligence submission is in fact only 2 weeks. And so what the next 4 slides are going to be covering is actually alerting those of you who will be approached to submit a proposal, what you need to be thinking around now, so that when you have a short period of time to ready your due diligence submission, then you are prepared, you've built in the infrastructure to do this. So the purpose of our due diligence on a lead organization, and of course a lead organization is also known as the prime contractor in a consortium or the lead organization, is to ensure that we are convinced that you can receive and disperse and account for and report on FCDO funding, and that you have a track record of managing financials of the size that you are going to be requesting. And that you also have a track record of in the disbursement across, for instance, multiple partners, say within a consortium. So that would be the focus of and the purpose of our due diligence. Right now, all of you, in terms of if you are proposing to submit a call for concepts, there is a single question in the call for concept application form regarding turnover and the scale of the project that you'll be looking for. And this builds, for those of you who haven't yet completed on who have registered your ROI, completed an ROI, the registration of interest in our projects, there are 4 very high level due diligence questions in the ROI around your turnover, around whether you currently have any contracts with FCDO, around whether you are aware of the fact that we operate within the FCDO ambit in terms of governance and ethics and so forth. And so those are all just checkbox answers, yes, no, yes, no. And so the due diligence that you will be required to do on the registration of interest is a checkbox. And on the call for concepts, you'll have to answer a question. And at this point, we would then, if you then are invited to submit a proposal, we would then go into the process of verifying your answers. And there is then a form that you would be required to fill in. It's a very standard form about your registrations within your jurisdiction with your tax authorities and your business authorities and so forth. And then it asks questions about your policies and about your preparedness within what differed, I beg your pardon, FCDO calls its pillars of compliance and governance. So the due diligence process questionnaire will accompany the RFP pack that will be sent out to those whose concepts have been deemed to be promising. And the due diligence process and the assessment process will operate in parallel. Due diligence opens first to enable you to handle that aspect of the requirements, as it were, get it done. It's pretty formulaic, so that we are giving a 2-week period for the submission of the due diligence pack, which is the signed self-certification document and supporting documents, of course. So if we ask, do you have a bank account? We would like a bank account to be verified by a letter from the bank. So this is, as I say, just to prepare you. We'll go into the next slide, please. For those of you who aren't aware, FCDO has 3 compliance levels. The highest compliance level, level 1, for the largest level of contracts, and then compliance levels 2 and 3 for slightly lower contract values. The due diligence does not alter substantially between the different compliance levels. Ongoing project management, should you be awarded a contract, that may differ. But from a due diligence point of view, the basics need to be covered in your due diligence, that you are a responsible organization with a track record and you are capable of managing the funding that you hope to get. So the process, very briefly, should you be invited to submit a proposal, the self-certification, as I've already discussed, the PMA then confirms the statements, verifies and assesses your status. We are required to submit a due diligence report as part of the recommendation pack that goes to the decision makers, so that they have both the due diligence report and they have the assessment report on the quality and content of your proposals, your commercial and technical proposals. If you're awarded a contract, there will be further vetting and an interview so that we can get to know one another. And should you be awarded a contract, you will also have ongoing due diligence engagements over the lifetime of the contract. For instance, an annual review that none of your documents have now fallen out of date, and so forth. I've got 1 minute to go, so I'm going to be very brief. As you can see, our principles are: we don't operate on a pass-fail. We do try to work with you. That if we think that you show promise, we can work with you, and these can be addressed through contractual and project management options. We consider all of these things, value, time frame, etc. And in our due diligence approach and our assessment and work with you. And of course, all of this is around risk management. And then my final slide is just an invitation to you all to pay attention to the model contract that was circulated as part of the Call for Concepts pack, and in particular the terms of reference, the terms and conditions in the model contract, because that contains the bulk of the information you would need to look at. And so please pay attention to this, and please submit any questions that you have regarding the contracting or the terms and the standard terms and conditions. Please submit to the procurement@smepprogram.org email address. What we will do, as with any question, is we will type them up, we will supply an answer, and we will circulate that answer for everybody's benefit. And so please do contact us. Many thanks, and I'm handing over to the next speaker.
In conclusion, before we move to the questions and answers, and I see on the chat, there's a lot of discussion going between different parties. If you don't manage to make the connections that you are hoping to establish in the chat, be aware that we launched this after we had our pre-engagement webinar. We are sharing a portal for registration of interest to collaborate. So we've shared this via emails, and it's hosted on our plastics procurement page as well. So you might well, while partnerships are not essential, the nature of the work that we're looking at will often require collaboration, and also the due diligence requirements also may require that you reach out and find a partner. I'm going to hand over to Jeremy Richardson. We've got some questions in our Q&A, which we'll take live. Over to you, Jez.
Thanks very much, Amanda. Okay, so we've got several questions in the Q&A. The first one is from Casper Way, who's asked about clarification around waste plastics from rivers and from garbage dumps, and would a solution that provided waste plastic pyrolysis, allowing for further use of single-use plastics, be within the scope of the call. Terry, could I ask you to just clarify that, please, for everybody?
Yes. So I'm just trying to restart something. Looking at the timing of the question, I'm not sure if I actually covered it in my my presentation, but basically, we're talking here about end of pipe. In a way, this is a type of remediation. So you're taking products which are in the environment and you're trying to do something with them. The pyrolysis element, this is essentially chemical recycling or feedstock recycling. And as I mentioned, if that is going, the intention is to go to fuel, diesel or whatever, then that would not be within scope. If that is going to a precursor, such as a monomer or a building block for products, then it could potentially fit. But the remediation aspect of it is not directly within the scope, so it's a little bit of a tricky one. What we're trying to do here was mitigate the original problem where we can, rather than look at the all of the issues that are currently there within the environment, because there are probably other programs better suited to do that. I'm not sure if this particular Casper, I think it was, if they have a system set up. So do they already have a collaboration of retrieving or remediating plastics and then doing something with them in terms of this pyrolysis approach, or whether they have materials and they're looking for something to do with them because they find that it's difficult to mechanically recycle them. So would need a little bit more understanding, I feel, Jazz.
Okay, thanks, Terry. I mean, Casper, if you do want to pursue that a little bit more, please do get in touch with us and we will try and answer your questions as best we can. So the next question is around requirements for co-funding. It's a request for a bit more information about co-funding, and does this include in-kind contribution? My understanding is that there is not a strict requirement to have co-funding here. There are certain restrictions on what we can fund. So there is a lot we can fund, but there may be certain things we aren't able to fund. I think in-kind contribution is good. We can use that. I think, Amanda, do you have any more to add to that, or do you think we've answered that question?
I just wanted to add as well, the question that Jeff was asking was that, is that it's around phase 2, so it would be anticipated co-funding further down the line, and that he's asking about the governance requirements for the funding, and absolutely we would want some clarity around that as well.
Yeah.
But I think also just to clarify that co-funding it's something we're interested in. It obviously contributes towards the overall, it contributes towards the overall financial feasibility of a project, whether it's private sector investment that you've secured or your own finance that you're putting towards it. And that's why we're also asking the question. So it's not necessarily a requirement from SMEP as well. You wouldn't be penalized if you don't have co-funding, but we're interested.
Thank you. That's very useful for clarification. Thank you, Amanda. Yes, and I noticed another question from Jeff around that, which I think you've addressed. I mean, I think the general message here is, if you do have co-funding, that's great. That means you can do more. It shows that we can demonstrate a degree of leverage, which helps us with our value for money arguments. So in general, we are very happy that there is co-funding, and we will we'll work with you to make that work. Okay, then I have another question here around biofuels, and whether biofuels this exclusion of biofuels include ethanol, which is used to make plastics. So Terry, I think this is probably in your wheelhouse here. Can I ask you to answer that, please?
Yes, of course, ethanol can be used to produce, for example, ethylene, polyethylene. So potentially, again, not understanding of in a fuller way the scope of that. It's difficult to judge it, but ordinarily you're going back to a product there, so it's within that remit, within that envelope, if you recall, we put up in terms of dealing with waste, making them back into products. It's very much an industrial symbiosis, let me say, type of approach there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so another question here around project management and technical support. So I think we are definitely interested in in strong project management for the distribution of the money. Melanie has gone into some detail around the due diligence that entities will need to go through. There is already those who've registered your interest to participate in procurement processes on the SMEP website will have already answered a few self-reporting due diligence questions. As Melanie said, there is one question in the call for concepts, but the real due diligence will come at the next phase. Those projects, based on your call for concept and evaluation of that, those of you that are asked to submit a full proposal will need to go through diligence. So it will be important that the entity that will receive the money and will distribute it and will report on it has some sort of track record. So that project management will be important, and that can be distinct from the technical management of the project. I don't know, Amanda, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't. I have, however, answered in typing a question on the technical support that the program may be able to offer. And here I'd like to say that it's relatively informal at this stage, but we are facilitating direct introductions where we're able to, as well as accumulating a database on initiatives which are designed to support solutions in this sector, and facilitating information exchange actively. But yeah, so that's what we're able to offer at this stage.
That's a very good point, because I know we already have had some discussions with people who have a great concept, but would like to be matched with an entity which has experience of dealing with grant funds and dispersing grant funds. So I do encourage everybody to use the collaboration field function that Amanda has described, and we will do our best also to, if people do want particular skills that they need to complete their call for concept, we will do our best to try and introduce people. Okay, so then there's another question here on the concept proposal evaluation. Will upcycling solutions be deemed more beneficial than recycling, and recycling better than downcycling? So Terry, can I ask you to provide an answer to this?
Yes, of course. So it depends a little bit on your definitions here. Closed loop, open loop, up, down, cycling. Basically, what kind of impact will it have on the aims of this particular program, which is to mitigate plastics pollution? So I think any submission or any concept that comes through will be evaluated based on its potential to make a significant or meaningful impact over time, once the project is completed. So difficult to say if what was in the questioner's mind there around the type of recycling, but we can say any recycling is better than plastics products going to landfill. So or worse, escaping into the environment. So yes, we would look and we would evaluate that kind of proposal based on its potential impact and at which stage of the development it is at.
Great, thank you, Terry. So I have then another question here around demonstrating government support as part of the application. This is one of those cases where it is not absolutely essential, but clearly if you do have, the more support you can demonstrate, the stronger your proposal will be and the better. However, those at the earlier stages in the TRL hierarchy that Terry outlined during the presentation, it may not be appropriate at that stage to have to be able to get government support. So it's not a prerequisite, but it would be great if you have it. Okay, so I think we've got a question here on pyrolysis again. I think that's been answered. If it's to make a fuel which will be burnt for energy, then SMEP is not a priority for SMEP to fund. If it's going to be the output of the pyrolysis will be chemicals that will be used to produce a new plastic or something new, then that is in scope. So, and then the question is, would converting single-use flexible films like crisp packets, chocolate wrappers, etc., and converting into roof tiles, housing pallets be covered? Terry, can I ask you to comment on this?
Yes, it's repurposing. So it's taking something which is very difficult to deal with. Small item, flexible packaging, pouches and so forth are very, very difficult to deal with. So if you can convert them back into something useful and meaningful, then I think that is within scope.
Okay, then we've got a question here around French version of the slides. I'm not aware that we have produced any French version of the slides. I think it would be safe to say that in terms of being able to do our due diligence and manage the project successfully, we would require a certain degree of competence in English. The reporting will be in English. So I think that will be one of the criteria we will look at in terms of being able to select a project, is the ability to operate in English. Okay, what are the reporting requirements throughout the duration of the project? Well, we are still working on this at the moment, but we would be looking for a reporting would be linked. We will not disperse the money. It's likely that we would not disperse all the money in one go. We would probably disperse it as it's needed. And we would probably be looking to make sure that certain requirements from the last disbursement of money have been fulfilled before we disperse the next chunk of money. So I think we would be looking for a regular, maybe quarterly reporting, against milestone targets that have been agreed around the funding. But that's something that we are finalizing at the moment, and it is something obviously we will be making clear in the request for proposals for those of you who are selected to go to the RFP. Again, Amanda, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to note, it's a research program, so there will be reporting requirements around activities undertaken and measurement of results. So
it's a very good point.
Yeah, but it won't be, it will obviously align as well to the milestones of what you're proposing, and we won't be saying, well, we need a quarterly report where it doesn't make sense, but it's very much around the strong reporting of the results of the activities.
Yeah, that's a very good point. We will be probably negotiating with successful applicants around producing publishable reports on their research, on policy briefs, on academic articles as well. So there may be those sorts of things that are part of it, the full proposal stage. So can government agencies at national or local level be partners with non-governmental organization in focus countries? So I don't see why not. FCDO does have some restrictions to some governments, whether it funds them directly or not. So that clearly, if that's the case, then that might be problematic. But in terms of showing partnership with government agencies, which ultimately means that this is likely to be taken up and used and well rolled out at scale, is going to be very positive for the program. So I think we would like to see partnerships with the public sector and the private sector where possible. Can we submit an idea or need to be a proof of concept? So I think I understand what this question is getting at. We're really looking at ideas that have already been tested in the lab, if you like. We're not, the primary purpose of SMEP is not to fund brand new ideas that have had no testing at all, or no pre-work at all. What we're really looking for are ideas that or concepts that have been tested, that they're at the technology readiness level of at least 5 to 9, so that there has already been some pre-work.
I would just add to that, Jess, that of course, as you've just been talking about budgets and disbursements and so forth, it needs to be something which is investable and programmable, so it needs to have a plan. So if it's not a proof of concept, then that's clearly not where we need to be.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so how will IP be protected? Carl, could you address this comment?
Yeah, just refer you to the standard IP clause in the contract template. So have a look at that, and that's how we'd like to deal with it. There are two elements here. One, we'd like to make sure that applicants who have IP are in fact protecting their IP. So we imagine that we would use our ITAP and others. So if you come up with an idea and you haven't protected the IP or haven't thought about it, we'd like to make sure that you do so that we don't end up, undermining your ability to benefit commercially from your opportunity. But FCDO has standard IP arrangements, and this is public funding, so don't expect public funding to lead to your exclusive use of your IP, but it will depend on circumstances. So there are circumstances in which, well, clearly your existing IP remains your IP. Inventions that are created by virtue of the funding need to be addressed, and we will address this expressly. So if the standard clause isn't to your liking or there's an issue with it, we need to be able to flag that early so that we can find a workaround. And it's our intention to find a workaround. It's certainly not our intention to allow other people to benefit from your intellectual property, even the intellectual property that you generate via, in part, the funding that comes from SMEP.
Okay, so thank you for that, Carl. We have another question here around evaluation, 12-month key milestone funding. How onerous will this be? Will there be a major hiatus? The intention will not to be a major hiatus. Clearly, some projects at smaller level may only be 8 to 12 months long. Others at the million to 1.5 million may be 2 years long. We obviously don't want to delay the program unnecessarily. So we would be seeking to do this sort of evaluation as the project is being rolled out. So I hope that answers that question. Okay, so there is a thing where you have done, there's a question here around machine design, molds and field work, but haven't done anything tangible till now. So can we go for the submission? I think that sounds like it potentially that you have done some work, and as long as you can put some sort of plan together, as Terry was talking about, then I don't see why that wouldn't qualify. Terry, is there anything you want to add to that? And clearly, without more specific information, it's a bit difficult to say.
Yeah, it looks just from that short paragraph sentence there that this is something which needs to be prototyped, or I'm not exactly certain, or perhaps they've done some minor prototyping and now need to do something at a bit bigger scale, so moving to that pilot, that could well be within scope. Take a look at that.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, so we have a question here which around companies with multiple offices in multiple locations. Should you make a application through your global company or through your local company? Carl, is there something you'd like to, can you comment on this particular question?
Sure, I was busy typing a response. So the fact that you've got the reach through subsidiaries in various countries and or a global enterprise, this is a positive for us because it helps in the scaling and the expansion of this idea. If you test it in Malawi, but it can have application elsewhere. And the fact that you can do that is an asset. And I don't think it matters to us whether you use the local or the global. And in fact, you could use an entity in a country which is not a focus country, Malawi, for example, but you think it has fantastic application in a focus country and or beyond. So any of those possibilities are fine for us. But the fact that you can is a point to highlight so that we can think about or contemplate the benefits of the expansion and or replication or scaling of your idea.
Okay, thank you, Carl. So we have a question here around letters of support at this stage. It is not strictly essential that you have to have the letters of support here. Clearly, it all helps. It all adds to the strength of your submission, but it is not absolutely essential. Mentioning that you have, you have these partners and that this evidence will be made available at the full RFP stage is probably going to be sufficient. But if you can, then clearly, it would be helpful if you can include any letter of support. So here we have a recycling of plastic waste from marine protected areas in a local industry, involving a local industry in scope. So I think this would depend. I will probably pass over to Terry in a moment, but it depends what you're going to do with the recycled. So SMEP would not necessarily fund just the recycling, the gathering of the material. However, if the recycling or of the gathering of the material was then recycling, so it could be remanufactured or repurposed, then that's definitely in scope with SMEP. Terry, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you're right. The actual remediation itself would not be included, but if you have materials which could subsequently be used as a feedstock, if you will, for the manufacture of other items, then that would that element of it would be within the scope.
All right, then. So I have another question here. Would involving local waste pickers collecting waste, which is processed and repurposed into high-value projects such as bricks, be in scope, or would this fall foul of remediation being out of scope? So again, I think this is a case of where you're dealing with the full life cycle. You are remanufacturing. You are producing a new product. Then that would be in scope. Terry, if you want to add any more detail, please do.
Yeah, I think these last couple of questions are similar in nature. What we're trying to do, remember, is to prevent plastics ending up in the environment. So if you are diverting it away from landfill or badly managed landfill or waste management, then clearly that's got to be fulfilling our primary goal So I think these would certainly be evaluated as being potentially in scope.
Okay. I think at the moment we don't have any more questions, and we're coming up to the top of the hour. What I would just like to say is that we deliberately have done a two-stage process here at SMEP, where we've asked for a call for concepts and then we are going to do the full proposal. The idea behind that was we want to encourage lots of people to submit their call for concepts. The idea is that the call for concept is not supposed to be hugely onerous, so that more people will submit their ideas. But at the same time, if the idea ends up not being appropriate or not being selected, it's not that a significant amount of your time has been wasted in putting that call for concept together. So with that in mind, if you are unsure, I would encourage you to try and submit a call for concept, or do send more questions to the PMA, and we'll do our best to answer those. I think that was really my main message to everybody. We're delighted that so many people have joined the call. We do very much look forward to all of you submitting concepts. We're going to enjoy looking at these, and it will be great trying to shortlist those that will go from to the request for proposal stage. It may be that we will have another call on plastics at a later stage. So that it could be that we could come back to some of the call for concepts are not successful in the first stage, and they could be, as more money becomes available, we could come back to it. So I think there could be more than one opportunity for people who are putting a call for concept together.
Thank you for the excellent questions, and Jeremy, thank you for the moderating and for the team that was responding to those questions in writing as well. Thank you very much for your participation, this very well attended webinar, and thank you to the panelists as well for your contributions. The email address as well for submitting questions, procurement@smepprogram.org. And just to be aware that we'll be sharing those questions and the answers as we go. We'll be updating the question and answer sheet and making sure that the questions are publicly available. Yeah, we're very much available to engage, so keep the questions coming. Thank you all.